Welcome to the deep dive. Instead of, endless scrolling, we pick out information that really counts and explore it together for you.
Mhm.
So today, we're diving into something that, well, it touches everyone, how we learn
Mm.
and what actually motivates us.
Yeah, what makes us tick when it comes to learning new things.
Exactly. And our mission today is really to understand how our evolutionary past might still be sort of pulling the strings when we try to learn something new.
And you found this really fascinating study for us to look at. It's an educational psychology review, quite recent, April 2024.
Right.
The title is An Evolutionary Approach to Motivation and Learning, Differentiating Biologically Primary and Secondary Knowledge. A bit of a mouthful, but basically,
Yeah.
it looks at adults learning vocabulary, and it asks, well, why do some things seem easier to learn or more interesting than others?
Right. And the core idea, the really intriguing part, is that maybe we're not like empty vessels waiting to be filled when we learn.
Hmm.
Maybe our brains are actually primed to learn and remember certain kinds of info, the stuff that helped our ancestors survive way better than, the new stuff modern life throws at us.
That's the gist. This idea that our evolutionary history biases what we find easy or motivating to learn.
Okay, so let's dig into that, this fundamental split they talk about,
Yeah.
the evolutionary angle on motivation. It's not just about being generally motivated, is it?
No, not at all. The evolutionary view suggests our motivation isn't like a general purpose engine, it's tuned. We're apparently much more driven to pick up skills and knowledge that would have, well, helped our ancestors survive and reproduce.
Okay.
And that leads to this really key distinction they make between two types of knowledge.
Right. Biologically primary knowledge. What sort of things fall under that?
Think about the universal stuff. Skills, information that you see across human cultures, things that have been vital for a very, very long time, like learning your first language,
Right.
recognizing faces, figuring out social rules, understanding basic things about nature, what's safe to eat, where water might be. Learning this often feels, well, almost automatic, especially for kids.
Now, kids just soak it up.
Exactly. It's intrinsically motivating. Think about social play. Exploring the world around them, that's how children naturally acquire this primary knowledge. It feels good, it's engaging.
So, a baby learning its mother's face, or kids just picking up language by being around people talking. That's primary.
Precisely. The idea is our brains have evolved specific systems, maybe even some innate leanings, that make learning these primary things pretty smooth. The drive to do the things that help us learn them, like interacting with others, is really baked in from early on.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So what's the flip side then? What's biologically secondary knowledge?
Right. So secondary knowledge is the stuff that's, evolutionarily speaking, quite new. It's mostly tied to things like formal schooling, modern economies. So we're talking about reading, writing, higher math, abstract science, like, I don't know, quantum physics, or using complex technology.
The things that often feel like hard work, like learning calculus or coding.
Exactly that. Learning these usually requires conscious effort, deliberate practice, often structured teaching. And crucially, it doesn't seem to come with that same built-in, effortless motivation we see with primary knowledge.
Because our brains just haven't had millions of years to evolve specific circuits for spreadsheets.
Essentially, yes, our brains didn't evolve in an environment where reading or calculus was a survival skill. And this is where the researchers talk about this really interesting concept, a potential evolutionary mismatch.
Mismatch, meaning
Meaning our brains are fundamentally wired for a world dominated by primary knowledge needs, but, modern society demands we master all this secondary knowledge to get by, to succeed.
so our ancient wiring might be a bit out of sync with our modern lives.
That's the hypothesis. Our learning architecture might not be perfectly suited for the tasks we now face daily.
Yeah, that's a really powerful idea. So this 2024 study, how did they actually test this primary versus secondary thing with adults? You mentioned vocabulary.
Yes, they set up a clever experiment. They got 144 adults. They were first-year psychology students at a Dutch university, actually.
Okay, decent number.
Yeah, pretty standard for this kind of cognitive study. Their task was to learn word pairs. A real Dutch word paired with a totally made-up fictional word.
Fictional words, so no one could already know them.
Exactly. Removes prior knowledge effects. But here's the key part. How they chose the Dutch words.
Okay. How did that link to primary and secondary?
They split the Dutch words into two lists. One list had evolutionarily relevant words concepts linked to primary knowledge. Think mother, food, love, water, enemy stuff, deeply tied to survival, social life, basic needs across history.
Got it. Fundamentals.
Right. The other list had evolutionarily novel words concepts linked to secondary knowledge. Things like computer, gravity, plastic, vaccine ideas, or objects that are relatively recent inventions or discoveries.
That's neat. So contrasting words for ancient human concerns with words for modern stuff. Clever way to isolate it.
Very clever. And they added another layer. They split the participants into two conditions. Half got a growth mindset intervention.
Growth mindset.
Hmm.
That's the idea that you believe effort makes you smarter, right? Not just fixed talent.
Exactly. So this group read some stuff about brain plasticity, how effort helps learning, and then they wrote a little letter encouraging a hypothetical struggling student. The other half, the control group, did similar reading and writing tasks, but the content wasn't about mindset or learning.
Okay, so learning primary versus secondary words with or without a little mindset boost. What were they actually measuring? What were they looking for?
Well, the main outcome was recall how well did they remember those fictional words paired with either the primary or secondary Dutch words after a learning period.
Makes sense.
But they also asked the participants to rate their experience. How enjoyable was learning each list? How interesting? How difficult did it feel? And how much effort did they think they put in?
Ah, so subjective feelings too. And I guess they checked if the mindset intervention actually changed their mindset.
Yep, they measured their general growth mindset beliefs before and after the intervention part.
Okay, got the setup. So what happened? What did they find?
The results were pretty clear, and they really backed up the researchers' main idea. First, a definite primary knowledge advantage,
Meaning?
meaning participants remembered the fictional words paired with the evolutionarily relevant primary Dutch words significantly better than those paired with the novel secondary words.
Wow. So the words linked to food and love just stuck better than words linked to computer and gravity.
Significantly better statistically speaking. It's pretty direct support for that core evolutionary hypothesis.
Yeah, it really seems like our brains latch onto those fundamental concepts more easily. What about the motivation side? The enjoyment, difficulty ratings?
That lined up perfectly, too. Learning the primary knowledge words was rated as, well, more enjoyable, more interesting, less difficult, and requiring less effort compared to learning the secondary words. And again, these weren't just slight differences, they were statistically significant across the board.
So it wasn't just that they remembered mother better. They actually liked learning it more and found it easier than learning gravity. That said a lot about that inherent pull.
It really does. It points towards an intrinsic motivational component tied to this primary knowledge.
Okay, but what about the growth mindset part? Did boosting their belief in effort help? Especially with those harder secondary words.
This is where it got interesting, maybe a bit unexpected. The intervention did work in the sense that it successfully increased the participants' reported belief in the importance of effort. The mindset scores went up in that group.
Okay, so it changed their belief.
But it did not translate into better recall performance for either type of word, primary or secondary.
Really, no improvement in memory.
Nope. And it also didn't change their ratings of enjoyment, interest, difficulty, or effort for learning the two types of words. The gap between primary and secondary motivation remained the same, whether they got the mindset intervention or not.
That is surprising. You'd kind of expect that focusing on effort might give them a boost, especially on the stuff they found harder.
You would think so, and the researchers acknowledged this was interesting. They looked at how this fits with other studies.
Does it align with previous work?
In some ways, yes. They pointed out that other research has shown that framing tasks like logic problems using primary knowledge scenarios, involving social situations or survival contexts, does tend to improve performance and engagement.
Like making a logic puzzle about sharing food fairly, instead of just abstract symbols.
Exactly. They also mentioned the animacy effect in memory. We tend to remember living things better than non-living things. This study kind of broadens that, suggesting it's not just alive versus not alive, but this wider category of evolutionarily relevant versus novel information.
Okay.
And they did highlight that their study was pretty novel in directly comparing the learning of vocabulary across these broad primary-secondary categories.
So it confirms some existing ideas, but also pushes things forward by looking specifically at vocabulary this way. Okay, let's circle back to that growth mindset finding. Why didn't it move the needle on performance here? Did the researchers have any theories?
They did offer a couple of plausible explanations.
Yeah.
One major point was the participants themselves, they were university students.
Right.
It's pretty likely that people who've made it to university already sort of understand that effort is important for academic success. They probably had to work hard to get there.
So the intervention might have been preaching to the choir a bit. They already kind of had a functional growth mindset, even if they didn't call it that.
That's a strong possibility. A short, one-off intervention might not dramatically change the deeply ingrained beliefs or strategies of students who are already relatively successful learners in a formal system.
Makes sense.
And they contrasted this with another study where a growth mindset intervention did seem to help vocational students learning physics, a definite secondary knowledge area.
So different student population, different
Yeah.
result.
Potentially, yes. The researchers suggested that maybe these kinds of interventions are more effective for younger students, or perhaps students from backgrounds where academic success and the idea of effort leading to improvement isn't as strongly emphasized or experienced. That fits with some other broader findings in growth mindset research, too.
So it's not that growth mindset doesn't matter, but its effect might depend a lot on the learners and their context. It's more nuanced.
Exactly, very context dependent.
Okay. So taking all this together, this clear difference in learning primary versus secondary stuff and the limited impact of the mindset boost in this specific case, what are the bigger takeaways? What might this mean for, say, education or just how we approach learning things?
Well, one of the big implications is thinking about how we might leverage that built-in motivation for primary knowledge to help with learning secondary knowledge.
How can we actually do that, like in a classroom or for self-study?
The paper suggests possibilities like designing teaching materials that explicitly connect new secondary concepts back to more fundamental primary knowledge frameworks.
For instance.
For instance, maybe when teaching physics principles, you could start with scenarios involving, I don't know, throwing things, survival challenges, understanding animal movement, things that resonate with our evolved intuitions about the physical world before getting too abstract.
Trying to anchor the new stuff in something more familiar, more instinctual.
Kind of, yeah. Make it feel more relevant to our basic human experience. They also briefly touched on some broader teaching ideas like productive failure, letting students grapple with problems first, and guided play for younger kids, which have some parallels with natural exploratory primary learning, though, the effectiveness of those is still debated in different contexts.
Right.
Another interesting little suggestion was maybe incorporating more primary skills, like physical movement or gesture, into learning activities, even for abstract topics. The idea being that engaging these more embodied, ancient systems might boost learning.
Using your body to learn, not just your brain. That's kind of cool. Tapping into something deeper.
Potentially. But, and this is important, the researchers were very clear about the limitations.
Like what?
Like the fact that this was a lab study, controlled conditions, relatively short-term learning. It's not the same as a real classroom over a whole semester.
Yeah, real life is messier.
Definitely. So they emphasize the need for more research out there in actual schools, tracking learning over longer periods to see how these evolutionary factors really interact with all the other things going on in education.
Absolutely, you need that real-world validation. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the kind of core takeaway message here about evolution and how we learn?
I think the main point is that our evolutionary heritage seems to have left us with, well, biases in learning. Our brains aren't just general-purpose learning machines. They seem predisposed to find certain kinds of information, the ancestrally relevant stuff, easier, more interesting, and more motivating to learn.
That biologically primary knowledge just has an edge.
It seems so. And this has real consequences because so much of modern life, especially formal education, revolves around that secondary knowledge, which requires more deliberate effort and often feels less intrinsically rewarding.
And the growth mindset finding, while maybe specific to this group, is a good reminder that interventions aren't magic bullets. Their effectiveness can really depend on the context and the learner.
Absolutely. It highlights the complexity. Fostering a belief in effort is likely good, but it might not automatically overcome these deeper, perhaps evolutionary influences on learning motivation and ease, at least not from a brief intervention in this kind of population. More research needed, as always.
Definitely. So thinking about all this, it kind of leads to a final thought, maybe a question for everyone listening. Given what we've discussed, this idea that our brains might be wired to learn certain things more easily, how could you maybe rethink your own approach when you face learning something new and difficult, something that feels like that secondary knowledge?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Could making a conscious effort to connect that new, maybe abstract information to something more fundamental, maybe finding real-world examples, linking it to basic human needs or social situations, even just using analogies that tap into those primary concepts, could that make the learning process feel more engaging, maybe more effective for you?
Hmm. Could bridging that gap yourself make a difference?
Yeah, it's definitely something to ponder as you go about your day, facing your own learning challenges.